Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today, we're going to be discussing the top 10 most powerful magical beings of the wizarding world. Being is one of the three classifications used by the British Ministry of Magic to distinguish the different magical creatures that inhabit the wizarding world, the others being beast and spirit. The term beings, at least for the most part, refers to the humanoid, or at least seemingly humanoid, lives of the wizarding world. And when I say humanoid, I mean possessing typical human characteristics, i.e. one head, a standard number of appendages, 2 eyes, etc. Although I suppose you could argue that possession of these traits being innately humanoid stems from a relatively human-centric point of view. There are also a few exceptions to this, which you'll see down below. Anyway, with that distinction made, I do want to point out that there are still quite a few humanoid creatures in the wizarding world beyond just conventional human witches and wizards, which is why I think that this will make for a fun list. This list will be ranked from least to most powerful, and I'll stick to canon to support my rationale. Anyway, let's dive in. 10. Hags. Hags, which resemble warty, evil-looking witches, were vile, child-eating beings that possessed rudimentary-level magic. Though commonly mixed up with witches, particularly in Muggle literature, it's important to note that hags and witches are two very different things. The appearance of a hag is what one might imagine when trying to consider the appearance of a witch, but for those who know of the magical world, they know that witches can actually be very beautiful. It's also worth mentioning that the level of magic that hags possess is significantly lower than that of a normal witch. In addition to being strikingly ugly and possessing only 4 toes on each foot, the hag is doubly scary because it just so happens to have a taste for human flesh, specifically the flesh of children. Despite their modest stature and limited magic, hags are still very dangerous, especially for children. 9. Trolls. Coming in at number 9 on the list are trolls. Trolls, which originally come from Norse mythology, were giant humanoid creatures of immense size, sometimes growing as tall as 12 feet and weighing up to 1 ton. It's also worth mentioning that there are several different subspecies of troll, including forest trolls, mountain trolls, river trolls, and the troll of Nadroj, a troll subspecies with disproportionately large hands. Trolls were incredibly dangerous, unpredictable, violent and aggressive creatures that had a taste for human flesh, making them particularly terrifying. It has been stated that trolls possessed rudimentary level magic. However, no one seems to really know how this magical ability was utilized. The Achilles heel of the troll, however, is its intelligence, as trolls are notably quite stupid creatures. In fact, trolls were so stupid that they had the lowest wizarding exam failing grade named after them. 8. Vampire. That's right, vampires, which are so prevalent in other fantasy worlds, also exist in Harry Potter. Rowling had this to say of vampires. Although vampires exist in the world of Harry Potter, as shown by the literature that Harry and his friends study in Defense Against the Dark Arts, they play no meaningful part in the story. The vampire myth is so rich and has been exploited so many times in literature and on film that I felt there was little I could add to the tradition. The only vampire whom Harry meets in the books is Sanguini in Half-Blood Prince, who makes a faintly comic appearance at a party. However, despite the vampire's absence from the story, it's worth noting that they are powerful magical beings. Vampires, which mostly resembled a normal witch or wizard in appearance, are perhaps best known for sucking out the blood of their victims. However, vampires have many other abilities as well, including, but not limited to, heightened senses, including vision, hearing, sense of smell, and the ability to transfigure into a bat. The biggest weaknesses of a vampire are A. that they don't use magic in the traditional sense, i.e. magic of witches, wizards, and B. garlic. 7. Pakwaji. Coming in at number 7, we have a creature native to America, the Pakwaji. We first hear of the Pakwaji when Isolde Sayer, the founder of Ilvermorny, encounters one in the mountains. Pakwajis are short, grey-faced, large-eared creatures distantly related to the European goblin. Fiercely independent, tricky, and not overfond of humankind, whether magical or mundane, it possesses its own powerful magic. Pakwajis hunt with deadly, poisonous arrows and enjoy playing tricks on humans. Pakwajis are perhaps best known for having one of the 4 Ilvermorny houses named in honor of them. 6. Giants. Coming in at number 6 are giants. Giants are incredibly powerful creatures that tend to live out their lives in tribes completely separate from the rest of the wizarding community. They are smarter than trolls, but stupider than humans, and their innate bloodthirsty nature has typically resulted in their own population control. The secret to giants' power is in their name. They are giant. In fact, they are larger than almost any other magical creature, equal in physical strength to dragons, and highly resistant to spells. Giants have been known to side with Voldemort, as we saw in both the First and Second Wizarding Wars. However, despite their immense power, they do have an Achilles heel: their eyes. The eyes of giants are much more vulnerable to spells and hacks, and this is how the good guys were able to take them out. This obvious vulnerability is the only reason that they aren't higher on the list. 5. Centaurs. Coming in at number 5 we have Centaurs, beings taken from Greek mythology that possess the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. The biggest distinction between centaurs of mythology and centaurs in Harry Potter is that Harry Potter centaurs are gifted in divination, a magical discipline that allows one to gather insights into future events. Centaurs are a bit of an odd one out on this list because, as it turns out, they're actually classified as beasts. However, this was purely due to their own request, as they didn't want to share being status with creatures like hags and vampires. That said, I still think they're more of a being. Centaurs boasted a large, intimidating physical appearance and were known to be versed in many different magical disciplines, including healing magic, divination, and astronomy. They were also naturally gifted at archery, which made them quite an imposing threat. Centaurs could also perform non-verbal magic, though their magic was fairly limited when compared with a human witch or wizard. 4. House Elves. House Elves were small beings, often between 2 and 3 feet tall, with spindly appendages and oversized heads and eyes. They also had pointy bat-like ears and high voices, which meant that they certainly weren't particularly intimidating. However, despite their unassuming appearance and small stature, House Elves are some of the most powerful magical beings in the wizarding world. You see, House Elves could easily perform wondrous magic at a very high level, higher than a well-trained witch or wizard. They could apparate with ease and disarm a witch or wizard in the blink of an eye. They were also fiercely protective of those whom they had given their allegiance. But if that isn't enough to convince you that they're powerful, just remember that Harry Potter himself once remarked that house elves were better at performing advanced magic than most wizards. The Achilles heel of the house elf? Their domestication. 3. Veela. Veela were magical beings that resembled beautiful human females, sporting white gold hair and moon-bright skin. Veelas are known for using their good looks to charm and hypnotize. However, there is certainly more to a Veela than meets the eye, as, when angry, they are said to take on a less pleasant appearance. In moments of anger, the face of a Veela elongates into a sharp, cruel-beaked bird head, and scaly wings burst from their shoulders. In this state, Veelas can also launch balls of fire from their hands. Veelas also possess their own form of wondrous magic. It should also be mentioned that Veelas were sometimes known to crossbreed with humans. A popular known quarter Veela was Fleur Delacour. While breeding with humans granted them certain human-like magical capabilities, it's also important to note that it's unknown whether a half or quarter blood Veela could transform in the way that a full Veela could. 2. Goblins. Goblins, which are often compared to house elves, were fair-skinned beings a little bit larger than elves that often possessed dark, slanted eyes, pointed noses, and pointed ears. And, like elves, goblins could perform wondrous magic at a particularly high level, perhaps an even higher level than elves. Goblins were also skilled metalsmiths and controlled the wizarding economy by running the banking system and minting all currency. However, the biggest weapon that goblins possessed were their brains. as they were particularly brilliant creatures that were wrongfully regarded as subservient and inferior in the eyes of many ignorant witches and wizards. Goblin kind have waged war on wizard kind on numerous occasions throughout history, with the goal generally being the same: abolish the injustices ingrained within wizarding culture. However, despite their best efforts, human witches and wizards have always come out on top. 1. Humans. Normal witches, wizards. Coming in at number 1, we have human witches and wizards. Now, this may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, because humans are certainly less intimidating than many of the other beings on this list. Humans aren't 20 feet tall, they aren't born with impressive magical expertise, they can't fly, and they aren't always very intelligent. However, as a whole, I think it'd be hard to argue against wizard kind being the most powerful, because, after all, they are the kingpins of wizarding society. And if we look at the history books, we can easily see that the most powerful beings to have ever graced the wizarding world have been humans. With that said, not all witches and wizards are powerful, and I would argue that their innate level of power is significantly lower than some of the other beings on this list. However, their ceiling of power, if you will, is the highest, as proven by famous wizards such as Dumbledore, Grindelwald, Voldemort, and even Merlin. And that's it for this video. What's your top 10? Did I miss any obvious beings as classified by the Ministry of Magic? Comment down below. Until next time, never mess with goblins, Harry.